My name is Sophie Perez. I'm 28, and up until today, I thought I knew everything about the man I was going to marry. Kevin Lewis, 30, charming, confident, my fiancé of a year. He'd always seemed like an open book, completely transparent, or so I thought. It all began like any normal afternoon. I had just wrapped up work, scrolling through my phone as I waited for him to get home. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room, making the silence feel almost heavier. That's when the text came in. Lawyer says I get half your business in the divorce. Thanks for building my retirement, LOL. It was from Kevin. I read it 3 times, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Divorce? What was he talking about? I thought everything was fine. Sure, we had our arguments like any couple, but divorce was never a serious topic. Not for us. At least I didn't think so. I typed back, interesting. That's all I could manage. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. But I knew one thing for sure. This was not how things were supposed to go. We were supposed to talk. We were supposed to work through things together. But here he was, making decisions without even telling me, without even giving me a chance to understand. I called him. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice cold. Sophie, I'm not coming home tonight. Kevin, what is this about? Divorce? You're not serious, right? He didn't respond right away. I'm just doing what I need to do to protect myself, he said finally, like that was an explanation. Protect himself? My heart sank. What did he mean by that? And what was he protecting himself from? The truth hit me then. Something was being hidden from me. There was more to this than a simple text. A secret, perhaps? I glanced at the clock. It was late in the afternoon, and I knew I couldn't just let this sit. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was going on, what had changed in the man I thought I knew. I paced around the apartment, my mind racing. There had been little signs here and there, his increasing distance, his odd reluctance to talk about his work, the way he'd always seemed a little too defensive when I brought up anything about his finances. But I had pushed those thoughts aside, convinced they were just stress from work. Now it seemed like I'd been living in a lie. I looked at my phone again, hesitated, then called my best friend Anne. She answered quickly, her voice warm. Sophie, hey, what's up? I think Kevin is hiding something from me, I said, my voice shaky. I just got a text, and I don't even know what to think anymore. Anne's voice softened. Tell me everything. And so I did. The more I spoke, the more I realized I was spiraling. There was a growing sense of betrayal, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I trusted him. I loved him. But how could I be so blind? Sophie, don't jump to conclusions yet, Anne said gently. But you need to dig into this. Find out what's really going on. I hung up, feeling a weight on my chest. I had to confront this head on. But what was I supposed to say? Where do you even start when your whole world starts to crack open? That night, I went to bed exhausted, but my mind wouldn't rest. Kevin's words echoed in my head. I'm protecting myself. And I realized for the first time maybe he wasn't the only one who needed to be protected. The following days were a blur of emotions. I couldn't shake the text from my mind, the coldness of Kevin's words. Half your business. It kept replaying in my head, like an accusation I didn't understand. I thought I knew him, trusted him, but now everything felt like a lie. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Every corner of our apartment felt like a reminder that things were crumbling around me. I had to figure out what Kevin was doing and why he'd been so secretive about his business for months. What had changed? Why now? I tried to call him again, but he didn't answer. It was like he was avoiding me, and that stung more than anything else. I sent him a simple message. We need to talk. Now. But the response I got was a string of one-word answers, each colder than the last. It wasn't long before I realized I wasn't going to get any answers from him directly. If I wanted to protect myself, I'd have to find out everything on my own. I knew Kevin had always been successful in his career, but I never understood the depths of it. He kept his work life so private. Sure, I knew he had some kind of business in industrial equipment, but we'd never really talked about it in detail. I guess I assumed it was his personal stuff, and we didn't need to share everything. Big mistake. My first move was to call my lawyer Jane. She was calm, methodical, everything I needed right now. We met the next day, and I poured everything out to her. Kevin's text, his sudden coldness, and my growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Jane listened carefully, her face inscrutable as I spoke. When I was finished, she looked at me, her voice low. Sophie, it sounds like he's trying to hide assets. You need to be careful here. If he's restructuring his business, he's likely trying to shield it from you. I felt sick. I couldn't believe it. Kevin would go this far? But I had to face the possibility. If he was hiding things from me, if he was preparing for a divorce behind my back, I needed to act fast. I'll start by getting some information on his business, Jane continued, tapping on her laptop. We'll get the financials, and we'll figure out where this money is going. But you need to prepare yourself. The truth could be worse than you think. I nodded, my heart sinking further. But I had no choice. I had to protect myself. I had built my own career, my own life, and I wasn't going to let Kevin take it all away, no matter how much I loved him, or thought I did. The next day, Jane had the first round of documents. They were more detailed than I could have imagined. Kevin had done a complete restructuring of his business, a move that, according to the paperwork, wasn't just a response to financial strain, but a strategic move to protect his assets in the case of a divorce. It turned out that a year ago, Kevin had taken on a substantial business loan, secured by company assets. He'd also brought in his father as a major investor. In other words, this business wasn't just his anymore, it was partially his father's, and the money tied up in it was now spread across multiple parties. The most shocking part? He had restructured the entire thing just months before his text, which now made it clear this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just about saving his business. It was about saving himself from a future payout. I stared at the papers, my stomach twisting. He was prepared for this. He'd been preparing for it for a while, just waiting for the right moment to make his move. The timing was impeccable, just when I started to question him, when our relationship was rocky. Just when the idea of a divorce had become real in his mind. But what did that mean for me? What was I entitled to? Was he really trying to take everything and leave me with nothing? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or step back. I called Jane again the next morning. We need to move forward with the divorce filing, but I want to make sure we don't just go through the motions. I want to make sure I'm not left with nothing. I agree, she said, her voice firm. This isn't just a personal betrayal. It's a financial game, and you need to be prepared. We'll request a full business valuation and take a close look at the restructured documents. We'll make sure everything is documented properly. But even as we made those plans, my heart kept telling me something else. I knew Kevin. I had spent months falling for him, trusting him, imagining a future together. And now all I could see was a man who was willing to destroy everything we had just to keep what was his. A man who didn't care if he tore me apart in the process. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the idea of losing everything, or the realization that Kevin had been planning all of this, that the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, had turned into someone I didn't even recognize. I had to face the truth now. The man I was about to marry wasn't the person I thought he was, and the future we had talked about, it was slipping through my fingers faster than I could catch it. I spent the next few days gathering documents, reviewing every last detail of our finances, our assets, and the future I thought we would share. Kevin's betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I wasn't going to let him win. I couldn't. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call from Jane with some news that made everything so much more real. They've filed for divorce, she said, and they're asking for half of your business. But there's a lot more to this than just money. It's going to be a fight, Sophie. Are you ready? I looked at the documents scattered on my desk, the pieces of a life I had built with Kevin, the life he was now trying to take from me. The reality of it hit me hard, but one thing was clear. I wasn't about to go down without a fight. The days leading up to the divorce filing felt like a slow descent into chaos. The weight of everything Kevin had done, his betrayal, his manipulation, hung over me like a storm cloud. I felt like I was constantly in survival mode, moving from one legal meeting to the next, digging through every piece of financial paperwork, every document he had touched. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply he had buried the truth. This wasn't just a financial game. This was a game of control, and I had no idea how far Kevin was willing to go. We met with my lawyer, Jane, every few days, strategizing, planning, trying to stay one step ahead of whatever Kevin and his lawyer were going to throw at us. But I knew the worst was yet to come. His business was the centerpiece of this whole mess, and no matter how much I fought for what was mine, it felt like I was always losing ground. The first real confrontation came when Kevin sent over his financial disclosures. Jane and I pored over the documents, each page revealing more of his scheming. But then, something unexpected happened. His lawyer sent a letter demanding an immediate division of assets, including 50% of the business. It was as though Kevin had already made his mind up. Everything I had worked for, everything I had helped build was his to take. They think the business is worth the full $340,000 in revenue, Jane said, shaking her head. But they're ignoring the $180,000 in debt. And they certainly aren't acknowledging that your fiancé doesn't even own most of it anymore. It hit me like a slap in the face. Kevin had set up his father as a majority shareholder, effectively reducing his stake to 35%. He had worked to make sure that, in the event of a divorce, he could walk away with what mattered most: the control. The business, not the marriage. But Jane wasn't done yet. We need to request a full forensic business valuation. If we can prove that the business is not worth what he claims, we'll have a better shot at getting what's rightfully yours. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The realization that Kevin had gone so far to protect himself, to keep everything he'd worked for, while leaving me with scraps, was crushing. But there was no turning back now. If I wanted to come out of this with anything intact, I had to push forward. And so we did. The battle took over my life. Every morning I'd wake up to new emails from Jane, new legal updates, new discoveries, new arguments. Every night I'd stay up late, filling out forms, reviewing financial statements, and staring at the cold, impersonal numbers that seemed to strip me of everything I had known about my fiancé. Then came the first court date. I had prepared myself for the worst, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional toll it would take. Sitting across from Kevin, with his cold, unreadable face, my heart twisted in my chest. He looked like a stranger. How could he do this to me? How could he sit there, claiming what was rightfully mine, all while acting like he hadn't just ripped apart the life we had built together? "Mr. Jones," the judge said, glancing at the documents in front of her, "it appears that the business has been restructured, and there's significant debt involved. Your wife is entitled to equitable division of marital assets, but you're claiming that the business is worth far more than it actually is." Kevin sat back in his chair, leaning into his lawyer as though he were untouchable. "Your Honor, the business is worth what it's worth. My fiancé is trying to make it seem like it's a failing enterprise, but the valuation is based on gross revenue, not on the actual debt structure." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. He wasn't even acknowledging what was happening, what he had done. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't admitting to any wrong. It was just numbers, cold and mechanical, and I was just another pawn in his game. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Foster, you're claiming that the restructuring was done to shield the assets from equitable division. What evidence do you have of this?" I took a deep breath. This was my moment. The evidence was solid. Kevin's own records, his business transactions, the reorganization documents. It was all there. I had everything I needed. "I have the full documentation of the restructuring," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The debt, the investment from his father, and the fact that he's been planning this for months. This isn't a simple business decision. It's an attempt to keep me from getting my fair share." The judge nodded, glancing down at the papers again. "We will review the evidence carefully, but as it stands, the business appears to be in a complicated financial position. This case will require a more thorough review." As we left the courthouse, I could feel the weight of the battle ahead. Kevin had dug his heels in. He wasn't just fighting for what was his. He was fighting to ensure that I would have nothing. The anger bubbled up inside me. Anger at him, at myself, for not seeing this sooner, at the system that allowed this kind of manipulation. But the worst part? It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe he had already won. Maybe I was just another woman left standing in the rubble of a relationship that was never real. The days following the hearing were filled with calls, emails, and more paperwork. Jane was relentless, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for her. But even as we pressed forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin's plan was too well executed. His business was his lifeline, and I was just an obstacle to him. The emotional toll was becoming too much. I spent hours alone in the apartment, staring out the window, replaying the court scenes in my mind. And every time, Kevin's face, his smug, indifferent face, was there. The man I had trusted had become a stranger. I had to admit it to myself. Kevin wasn't the person I thought he was. The man I had fallen in love with, the man I had dreamed of marrying, was nothing more than a stranger with a carefully crafted facade. But I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. I wouldn't let him destroy what I had built for myself, what I deserved. This fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and everything he thought he could take from me. As the weeks dragged on, it felt like I was sinking deeper into this fight. The court dates were relentless, the legal fees mounting, and the emotional toll on me was immense. Every day, I was either preparing for another battle with Kevin or staring at the pile of evidence that felt more like a weight than a lifeline. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that I couldn't keep fighting like this. I couldn't keep running on anger and resentment. If I was going to win, if I was going to take back control, I had to stay focused. I had to outsmart him. Then came the moment that turned everything around. It was late one evening when Jane called me, her voice calm but urgent. "Sophie, I've got something. It's big." I felt a surge of anxiety. "What is it? What did you find?" "The forensic audit. We've uncovered something Kevin didn't account for." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "His restructuring," Jane continued. "It wasn't as clean as he thought. There are discrepancies in the documents he submitted. His father's investment, specifically the timing of the funds, isn't adding up with the business's valuation. And there are some questionable transactions involving the loans he took out. We've got a window to show the court that he wasn't entirely transparent." I felt a spark of hope flicker. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The cracks were starting to show in his perfect little plan. Kevin thought he was untouchable, but now, with this new information, we had a chance to catch him in his web of lies. I couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. We were going after him, and this time I wasn't just reacting, I was taking the lead. We spent the next few days preparing our case. Jane brought in a forensic accountant who had gone over Kevin's financials with a fine-tooth comb. The discrepancies weren't huge, but they were enough to raise questions, enough to weaken Kevin's position in the eyes of the judge. The new evidence was presented in the next hearing. Kevin's lawyer, who had been so confident up until this point, suddenly seemed rattled as Jane laid out the case. It was like watching someone slowly lose their footing. "Your Honor," Jane said, her voice cool and composed, "we've discovered that the restructuring of Mr. Jones's business wasn't as transparent as he claims. There are timing issues with the investment from his father and questionable transactions regarding the business loans. We believe these discrepancies raise serious concerns about the legitimacy of the company's valuation." Kevin's lawyer stood up, visibly shaken. "Your Honor, these claims are without merit. Mr. Jones's business is legitimate. These are small oversights, not fraudulent activities." But the judge wasn't buying it. She looked at the documents carefully, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed the evidence. The room fell silent. I could see Kevin squirming in his seat, his usual confidence replaced with nervousness. "We will take this new information into account," the judge said, "but I'll need further clarification before making a final decision. We will reconvene in 2 weeks for a more thorough review of the business's financials." I couldn't believe it. The tide had turned. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt like I was gaining the upper hand. Kevin had underestimated me. He had thought he could outmaneuver me, play the system, and get away with everything. But now it was clear. The game was changing. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept my focus on the end goal. I couldn't afford to let my emotions take over again. I had to keep my eye on the prize. Kevin was still trying to play the victim, still sending me angry texts, accusing me of ruining everything, but I ignored him. I wasn't here to listen to his guilt trips anymore. I wasn't here to beg for his love or approval. I was here to protect what was mine and to make sure he didn't walk away with everything. I was here to make sure he didn't think he could just erase me from his life without facing the consequences of his actions. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I was ready. This was the moment we had been working for, the moment everything would come to a head. We sat across from each other in the courtroom, the tension between us palpable. I could feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating, as if he were trying to read my every move. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't. "Your Honor," Jane began, her voice clear and authoritative, "we have provided all the necessary documentation to prove that Mr. Jones' restructuring of his business was done with the intention of shielding assets. The evidence we've presented, coupled with the discrepancies in the financials, make it clear that this was not a legitimate business move, but rather a strategic attempt to avoid equitable division of marital assets." Kevin's lawyer tried to push back, but the judge was already looking at him with skepticism. She had heard enough. "I've reviewed the evidence carefully," the judge said, her voice stern. "The discrepancies in the business valuation are troubling, and it's clear that Mr. Jones has not been fully transparent. The timing of his actions and the involvement of his father raised serious concerns. I felt a surge of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but it was clear that the judge was starting to see through Kevin's facade. She wasn't buying his story anymore. After a long pause, the judge turned to us. Based on the evidence presented, I'm ruling that the business will be valued more conservatively, taking into account the debt and the changes in ownership. The division of assets will be adjusted accordingly. I could hardly believe it. Kevin was losing ground. The judge was going to rule in my favor, and I was finally going to get what I deserved. It wasn't just about the money, it was about justice. As the hearing came to a close, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was winning. We walked out of the courtroom together, Jane at my side. I felt exhausted, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Kevin tried to approach me as we left, but I turned away, my mind made up. This was over. He had tried to break me, to tear me down, but I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to let him win. Not now, not ever. The ruling came down a few days later, and I could barely bring myself to look at the documents when they arrived. I had already won in many ways. The fight had already been worth it, and I was walking away from this divorce with the integrity I had worked so hard to preserve. But the final numbers, the ones that would determine how much I walked away with, were what mattered most. Kevin had lost the battle. His carefully constructed empire, which he had thought would shield him from losing anything of real value, had come crashing down under the weight of his lies. The judge's ruling on the business was clear. The restructuring was legal, but the value of the company was far less than Kevin had initially claimed. His attempt to hide behind his father's investment had only backfired. When I received the news, I thought back to the woman I had been just months before, confused, trusting, naive, and the woman I had become. The woman who had faced betrayal head-on and fought back. The woman who had found her voice, who had rediscovered her strength, and who was now walking away with a sense of dignity that Kevin would never understand. My first call was to Jane. We won. We actually won. I heard her smile through the phone. I told you you'd get there. You played it smart. I nodded, staring out the window of my apartment. The city looked different now. It felt different, as if a new chapter had already begun. How much? I finally asked, my voice trembling slightly. Your share of the business is valued at around $38,000 after the adjusted valuation. Plus, you'll be receiving half of the house's equity, which comes to about $70,000. After legal fees and some adjustments, you're walking away with around $100,000. I was quiet for a long moment, processing. It wasn't the amount I had hoped for when I first walked into this fight, but it was something. It was mine, hard-earned and hard-won. No one could take that from me. Thank you, Jane, I said softly. I couldn't have done this without you. She chuckled. You did all the hard work, Sophie. I just pointed you in the right direction. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, signing off on the final agreements, sorting through the house sale, and transferring the last of the business assets. But through it all, I kept reminding myself of one thing. I wasn't just walking away with money. I was walking away with my dignity, my future, and the knowledge that I had fought for what was mine. I didn't hear from Kevin for weeks. His silence was deafening, but I didn't let it bother me. He wasn't the man I thought he was. His betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, and the lies he'd told to keep everything for himself were nothing short of despicable. But I didn't need him in my life anymore. Then, one day, he reached out, a simple text message. I hope you're happy, Sophie. You destroyed everything. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and pity. He had no idea what true destruction was. What he had done wasn't destruction, it was manipulation. It was a lie that had been exposed. The truth had come out, and it was him who was left in the rubble. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His words no longer had power over me. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. The house was sold, and Kevin moved into a new apartment in the city. I moved into a smaller place, still adjusting to the change, but feeling more at peace every day. I'd spent so many years living in the shadow of someone else's dreams. Now, it was time to build my own. As for Kevin, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had tried to move on with his life. Apparently, his new girlfriend was someone he'd met shortly after the divorce was finalized. From what I gathered, she didn't seem to last either. One by one, the women he tried to replace me with came and went. I suppose it's easy to hide behind someone new when you've never fully faced the consequences of your actions. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Not because of his failures, but because I had realized something important. I wasn't the one who needed fixing. I wasn't the one who had broken us. He was. Over the next few months, I focused on myself. I took up yoga, which was something I had always wanted to try. I enrolled in a few business courses, something to keep me occupied and challenged. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, who didn't see me as a tool for their own gain. People who saw me for who I truly was. And as time went on, I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. I no longer resented Kevin. I didn't need to. He was no longer a part of my life. I was free. I had won, not just in court, but in life. One evening, I ran into Diane at the grocery store. She was with her daughter, Madison, and when she saw me, her face tightened. She looked at me with contempt, as though I were the one who had ruined everything. But I didn't care anymore. I simply nodded and kept walking. The truth was, I had already moved on. I was stronger now, more confident than I had ever been. The lesson I had learned was clear. When someone shows you they see you as a means to an end, when they try to take everything from you, don't let them. Protect what's yours. Protect yourself. It had taken me a long time to realize that, but I finally understood. As for Kevin, he was out of my life for good, and I couldn't be happier.